just need a little brain salad surgery. I got to cue my insecurity. That I've been in the wrong place, but it must have been the right time.
Oh, get out of here.
Double down, lug nut. Welcome to the Fo0H Tribe, bitches.
I just got to be honest with you. Who else is as excited as I am for the football season? I mean, who else has been glued into Hard Knocks? I'm like hanging on every single word over there. This Saquon Barkley thing, holy jumping catfish, has put me in a freaking deep spiral. But nevertheless, Neighbors is going to be a baller, and I know you agree with me. Fantasy football. Anyway, welcome to the Fo0H Tribe Podcast, bitches, where men can be men. And in this week's episode, compared to last week's episode, where I viewed the definition of men and in between men from a Gen Xer's perspective, from my perspective. It's not good or bad, but this week, with the help of the State of American Men 2023 study, I recognized that there's generations that we didn't even include in the process, and so it's just widened my view. It's widened my view in a number of different areas, and it just got me super excited to share with you what I redefined and what I uncovered. So, Polar Pop time. Get on in there. I'll see you in there. This episode is a build on last week's. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode of the In Between Men, it would be in your best interest to consider listening to that before you dive into this one, because this will be a build on to what we've already talked about, and a further definition of what I explained, but from the perspective and view of a Generation X guy. And you might be asking yourself, well, what has that got to do with anything? Well, I see the world as a man, very differently than other generations. And it's by no coincidence, and thankfully we have it, that I went back to the State of American Men study 2023. And I went back there because I recalled the following. I recalled that in the breakdown of the demographics of the 2022 men who were a part of the survey, Equimundo broke down the population of men into age groups. And what I didn't realize before, that I realized now, going back to it, was that when it defined each age group, it also included a generational definition. Sorry, it included a generation that you could further do more research about. And so what I want to do in the first part of this episode is to go over with you why I think it's important to point out that these different age groups, and call it different generations, have also a different understanding of what male values are, that I think are significantly, might be a stretch of a word, but I would say acknowledge that there are aspects of the traditional male value system that I'm aligned to as a 53-year-old that doesn't necessarily apply to their definition of their male value system. So, and I'm hopeful. I was hopeful. I mean, like, it brought me hope after doing this research, because, well, you'll see why. So I was compelled
to write out the age groups of this study and the generation that they are tied to, associated with the age group. So we're going to be talking about age groups today that doesn't really, that the survey doesn't go into a lot of detail about, which I think is interesting, but you can't go through everything. So men between the ages of 18 and 23, which did participate in this survey, are classified as the Generation Z or Gen Z. And I asked myself, what the hell does that mean? Furthermore, men between the ages of 24 and 30 are considered zillennials. Who even knew that that was a definition of a generation? I didn't, but they are included in this survey. And then there's the men between 31 and 34, and they're considered millennials. And then who knew this? Men between the ages of 38 and 45 are considered elder millennials, or further defined as geriatric millennials. What the hell does that even mean? So I asked myself, what is the definition of Generation Z? What is the definition of zillennials? What's the definition of millennials? And what's the definition for elder millennials? And so what's been interesting and kind of exciting is that I have been using for work an AI infused tool called Perplexity. And I'll tell you why I'm not using ChatGPT. And the primary reason why I'm using Perplexity is because, like Google and Google search, it scours the internet for information that it can serve back up to you. And when you ask Perplexity a question like, how do the men of Generation Z value male attributes, or something to that effect, all right, just stick with me there. It'll give you an answer, and it will provide to you the actual research or article or information that it gathered that information, that gathered the answer to that question from. And then it further uses the context of that answer to provide roughly 5 additional questions that you could ask on top of that. And I think that that's pretty cool. And because I don't have a research team, why not use perplexity.ai? But in full disclosure, right, like, I don't know how valid any of the information is. I'm just providing my perspective and my opinion that you can choose to take or not. So let's go into the definitions of each one of these generations. Okay, so what I didn't do, well, no, that's not true. I did. Where is it though? Anyway, so I'm going to skip the first one, 18 to 23, and move on to the definition of zillennials. Okay. So according to perplexity.ai and Wikipedia, zillennials have been characterized as a micro generation. I did not look that up, so if somebody wants to do that, go for it. They are the children of young baby boomers and Generation X. They were first to experience adolescence in a post 9/11 world. Most became of age around 2010. Zillennials experienced the sudden digital revolution of the late 2000s and 2010s. They've navigated the LTE internet, cell phones, mobile devices, and smartphones. So they are of that generation where likes are important, where image is important. You know, there was a whistleblower at Facebook who talked about how Facebook knew that they were affecting women, girls negatively using their tool, and how that impacted them emotionally and socially. Okay, so that's the definition of zillennial. Now we're going to move into the definition of millennials, also known as Gen Y or Gen Y. The mid 1990s and the early 2000s are ending years. Really, usually born between 1981 and 1996 are where you're going to find your millennials. Most millennials are children of baby boomers and older Gen Xers. They are the parents of Generation Alpha, which, by the way, I didn't look up, so I don't know what that means. So if you want to look up what Generation Alpha means, please feel free. But they can be described as the first global generation. Why? Because they did grow up with a infant internet that was growing in leaps and bounds, and have adapted to using the internet and all the other tools, apps, and things associated with it. Now we got the elder millennials, often referred to people between the ages of 35 to 45, or a micro generation of the people born between 1980 and 1985. They are also called geriatric millennials. This group is unique because they are fluent in early internet and digital technology, but have also adapted to new technology like TikTok and Instagram. Very similar to actual millennials. But one of the things that helped me understand why they were defined as geriatric millennials was because they also have a profound look towards physical health and the things that are associated with staying healthy: walking, jogging, CrossFit, eating right, carbs versus protein. You got it. Those are elder millennials. Okay. And so let me just take 1 second to confirm. Okay. So after coming up with the definition for those 3 out of 4 generations, I plugged into Perplexity. How do millennial men value and view the world as it pertains to male success or a male value system? Okay. So let's go to Zillennials first. That's on a different page. Okay. Here we go. So Zillennials. Zillennials, men's views or male value system. Zillennials are evolving the definition of masculinity and have redefined traditional masculinity values, placing less effort on stereotypical traits like physical strength and emotional stoicism. Why is that relevant to what we're talking about? Well, I was under the impression that this same generation or group of males didn't view, had a much more conservative view towards stereotypical male traits. They're evolving the definition of masculinity. They are further promoting it towards what I would conclude is more emotional and even spiritual growth. They have an emphasis, the Zillennials, on selflessness and community. "91% of Zillennial men believe men should help others. 80% of Zillennial men said they should give back to their community." Now, we're not saying that Gen Xers or people of my age don't do that, but we're talking 91 and 80%. That's a big number. Furthermore, Zillennials have become more open to personal growth. 88% of Zillennial men surveyed believe that men should be open to new ideas, experiences, and people. And they've opted for personal development and adaptability. Zillennials have a profound view on health and self-care. Zillennials have emotional intelligence. Younger men are more likely to value emotional strength at 83% and intellectual strength at 87% over physical strength at 75%. Zillennials have more progressive values, and Zillennial younger men are likely to trust online influencers over traditional authority figures, which isn't great and also speaks back to the State of American Men survey. So after understanding how Zillennial men determine their value, I think that this is huge because they are much more open to the idea of emotional and potentially spiritual growth as a positive value as they grow older. Okay, so let's also go to, where is it? How do millennials view the world? All right. So millennial men are defined by a complex and involving sense of masculinity that diverges significantly from traditional norms. Again, this is important to point out. They could be more open-minded to the idea than my generation. They are influenced by various social, economic, and cultural shifts, and they intend to embrace a more nuanced and individual understanding of what it means to be a man. So, I would include in that, they are more open to the idea of emotional and spiritual growth. Millennial men often reject the traditional notions of masculinity, which emphasize physical strength, emotional stoicism, and dominance. Instead, they are crafting their own definitions that incorporate emotional intelligence, sensitivity, and a balance of traditional masculinity with female traits. Hey, there you go. Which I am all for. And then, furthermore, how do elder millennial men see the world and the definition of male values? So elder millennials grew up during a transitional period. They have experienced both the digital and analog age. Elder millennials also grew up and were raised with a more egalitarian attitudes. Now, I'm going to spell it for you. It's EGALITARIAN. I am not able to pronounce that very well. But after looking it up, it's the believing that all people are the same. Okay? Elder millennials had economic hardships with the 2008 economic crisis. They've often delayed adult milestones like getting married, having children, or home ownership, primarily due to economic factors and the changing of social norms. And they have also redefined masculinity, and they are embracing a more nuanced understanding that includes emotional and intellectual intelligence and sensitivity. So all four of those definitions of how they view men's values are different than mine. And if I am honest, last week I looked at it only from the Generation X perspective, from my point of view, which is cutting off my nose to spite my face, because I believe these generation of men or different generations of men could be more open to the idea of having emotional and spiritual growth as a confirmed male value as they grow older. All right, so let's talk about how older folks like me, or how Generation Xers grew up with this viewpoint of male values. So the Generation Xers are critical observers, see themselves as detached, analytical, and cynical observers. I can say to a certain extent, I'm like that also. This is the last generation to grow up with the internet. They have wonderful memories of pre-digital world while also adapting to rapid technological changes. And I can wholeheartedly agree with that. They are disruptors and critics. They have found a voice as cultural critics and disruptors, challenging existing institutions and power structures. They are also frustrated with baby boomer leadership. I couldn't agree with you more. They are very practical on their approach, meaning they're very results oriented and have idealistic concepts. They take great pride in cultural contributions, and they are conflicted about current issues and struggle with new social movements. Often there is tension between the progressive roots and the conservative tendencies. So we are more conservative on how we see the world as a Gen Xer. And so with this new viewpoint, can you see why I'm more excited about what we uncovered here? Like, we have roughly 3 generations of men in this study that are more apt to be open to emotional growth than my generation, who looks at that as a negative thing. We don't want to do that. So in the course of defining the in-between man, I also wanted to make sure that I pointed out the definition of men. And I've changed it up a bit. And I want to stop and simply say to you that I am not trying to criticize the validity that comes with a traditional male value system. I am simply pointing out some of the areas that I believe the newer generation of men are starting to acknowledge. But I believe that there are plenty of examples, and I'll share 2 with you that I think apply, that confirm that men can have a traditional male value system that gives them great value and worth, right? So before I do that, before I share with you those definitions, I wanted to just take a step back again and highlight to the ladies that are watching this. It brought me back to a TED Talk that none other than Brene Brown was giving. And the topic was on shame. The topic was on, a number of different things. But she points out in this talk, and I can't remember which talk it actually is, that there are critics of what she's doing that don't like it, and that critics are everywhere, and that she says that she was never prepared for the level of criticism that came her way when she was willing and eager to share with A, the world her research, and B, her personal experience on getting through times that were troubling for her and how she applied the research. So she adds into one of her TED Talks a quote from the none other than Theodore Roosevelt. And if you've heard this quote, then you know what I'm talking about. But I like this quote because it further confirms that men can feel valued and appreciated in a traditional male value system. Okay? And so in this case, the Theodore Roosevelt quote says, "It's not the critic that counts. No man who points out how strong a man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms and great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at his worst, if he fails, while daring greatly, so that his place never be with those cold and timid souls who either know victory or defeat." And I can say with a fair amount of certainty that I do believe there are a number of examples in our world today that can be attributed to not either publicly confirming that additional emotional and spiritual growth is required in order to be successful. And I would start off first by saying Dana White. I think Dana White has experienced through his time at the UFC many great successes and also some significant failures, right? And there's value in that. There's personal experience with that. I would say also too that, Joe Rogan is another example that falls within that realm. Their success and connection to that success has given them what they've needed to confirm their value as men. And again, these are my assumptions. I don't know Joe Rogan and I don't know Dana White. But what I do know about them, I really like. Because those guys are men. They are definitely men. And I can't say beyond a shadow of a doubt of whether or not I know they meditate or actively engage in growing emotionally and spiritually, but I would deem them as success. And that you don't actually have to have emotional or spiritual growth as a part of your component for being a successful man. You don't. I simply want to convey that based on my experience, and I think others, it's a positive option. Okay? It's a positive option for sure. So I've taken upon myself to update the definition of men and then update the definition of in between men. So let me give it to you. Okay. So men, not in between men over time, regardless of their generational knowledge, have accepted traditional male value system that does primary focus on the man's ability to provide. Okay? I would say primarily focus on their man's ability to provide. Again, external achievements, status, money, wealth, all those things. You do that and you are, I would imagine, feeling pretty confident. Okay? Furthermore, associated with men, consequently, the supporters of the traditional male value system, often society, loved ones, family, and friends, and even the individual themselves, downplay or belittle work that empowers emotional and spiritual growth. So what I'm saying there is that, you know, don't go down that road. You've already had some great success. You don't want to highlight the fact that you have any emotions or that you need and want and seek emotional support and spiritual support. Okay? So there's that definition. So what happens is that the result is that some men, not in between men, but some men question, they intellectually question one or more aspects of the traditional male value system, but somehow intuitively believe one or more aspects of the traditional male value system lacks emotional or spiritual substance. Okay? So, intellectually questioning it is not the same as accepting it. Right? You can intellectually question anything. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. What I would say happens next is the traditional, what I would say next is once that man questions it, two things can happen. Well, three things can happen. They can stay where they are, where they feel valued as men, without having to embark on emotional and spiritual growth and live a happy life. And I promote that. I'm not trying to downplay that. I promote that. But I think men who do question fall into or can fall into graduating to in-between men. And in-between men are defined in two areas. So, over time, the in-between men gradually accept one or more aspects of the traditional male value system, but do believe it lacks emotional and spiritual substance. But they reject or deny the notion of any additional or spiritual growth applies to them. So they've gone from questioning to maybe accepting that it could apply to them, but they choose not to venture down that path. That's the definition of one group of the in-between men. The second group, which is very much the same as the first group, has one major change. The second group is over time, the in-between men gradually accept that one or more aspects of the traditional male value system does lack emotional and spiritual substance. Although they embrace, sometimes quickly and sometimes slowly, the notion that they can and willingly choose to grow emotionally and spiritually, and thus become an in-between man. They can move in and out of the traditional male value system and apply aspects to it where they feel value, but they also have accepted that there's areas in the traditional male value system that lacks emotional substance and spiritual growth and embraces it. It's the best of both worlds. They truly become in between men. And I hope I've said it enough. And if I haven't, I'll say it again. If you are a man who feels value and has confirmed value in the traditional male value system and have achieved status and financial security and all of those things that define that, and you're happy, then I'm good with that. I'm simply saying to you, have you considered something else? And if you choose to say, I have and I'm not interested, that doesn't mean that I won't invite you over for, coffee and a football game, because I will. I get it. But for someone who hasn't considered that, and then does accept that they can consider additional emotional and spiritual growth, then that's the win. And in that definition of the in-between men, I believe they found the best of both worlds. And that's what I wanted to make sure I conveyed today. Furthermore, with that understanding and outreach to you about that, we have 3 generations that we just defined as being way more open to the idea of finding their own way outside of the traditional male value system. I mean, I really don't know how any other way to say it than the way that I am saying it. So I don't want to come off being repetitive, but I found myself just in this podcast saying it a number of times. But I think I'm reiterating the point. And if I'm doing it too much, you can tell me to stop. But this weekend, the research that I did was refreshing and helped me see that the other generations that I considered having a Gen X view on emotional growth are closer to that than the latter. And I'm grateful for that. I mean, that is a good thing. And I want to make sure that I point that out and at least try to point it out. So I am going to call it. I'm going to throw in the towel. I got to do some work around the house. Butch, I think, is a little hungry. Butch, are you hungry? Yep, he's hungry. And do me a favor, along with Butch and anyone else that you can think of, and anyone else that you know that's connected with anyone else, a favor. Please, get the fuck out of here. And remember to have a good day, and that this is a gradual process. You don't need to swallow it all at once. And we'll figure out more of it as we go. I don't know what we're talking about next week, but I'm going to let this marinate. And I'll see you in there. Have a good one, everybody.
Mark my words, Neighbors is going to be a fantasy behemoth. I just know it. I feel it in my bones. But I'm excited about what we've uncovered. And please forgive me if I get long-winded. Sometimes I don't have the vocabulary I want to have in order to diligently express and explain what it is that I'm uncovering and believe in my heart is true. And so, I mean, I could go back there and redo it, but I'm just going to keep it to you straight and, keep it as genuine as I can, because I'm not trying to be somebody that I'm not. But check us out on YouTube, thefoodtribe.com, and Apple Podcast. We're on Spotify along with TikTok, and that's www.thefoodtribe.com. We got some cool merch there too if you want to check that out. If not, don't worry about it. And before I go, I'll see you in there. Blueberry Chesterfield, South Korea.